Edward Rapp is a group president and executive office member of Caterpillar Incorporated, with administrative responsibility for construction industries, including earth-moving, excavation, building construction products, China operations, Europe and South America operations, and the global construction and infrastructure divisions. With 2012 revenues of $65.875 billion, Caterpillar is the world's leading manufacturer of construction and mining equipment, diesel and natural gas engines, industrial gas turbines, and diesel-electric locomotives.
Ed, I've heard you refer to the need to be a corporate athlete and to unpack your suitcase and to stay calm in order to have the sort of professional position you have and have the sort of journey you've had to get to this position. Can you look back and reflect back on your time at Mizzou and tell us what served you well, starting with that along your journey to go from studying finance with us, working the farm on the weekends, to where you are now?
Yeah, I guess if I just look back on the time at Mizzou, and I'd take it broader that the time in the Midwest. Yeah, I just think it provided a great foundation. I mean, first of all, growing up in a small community farm, you get the work ethic, you get the values, and if you look at today's business world, I think the companies that have sustained themselves are the ones that have a very strong values base, and for me, I look at a big part of that, coming from the foundation. It came from, being in the Midwest. In terms of Mizzou, I think, it gave me two things. One, it gave me confidence. I came off of a very, a small community. I graduated, I was one of, 30 kids in my graduating class. I always say it made it easier to get into the top 10. But there was a degree of uncertainty as can you go out and compete? And I think Mizzou, being able to compete here, perform in class, get good grades, gave me a level of confidence. The other thing that this foundation from Mizzou gave me was the ability to learn. A lot of times when I talk to young students, they say, I can't wait to get out of school and get into the real world. I've just had it up to here with learning, and I always tell them there's good news and bad news. The good news is the real world's a lot of fun. The problems you get to solve, the challenges you face are really interesting. And I explain the bad news is the learning never stops. And the ability to simulate, to learn that you gain from a university setting, like Mizzou, has just served me exceptionally well. And I think it's the strength of that Midwest foundation and what Mizzou gave me that makes it very easy to stay involved, stay engaged, and in some small ways try to give something back.
And we're glad that you do. So in order to go along this journey, I'm sure you had to really work incredibly hard. How did you maintain your balance in your life along the way?
Yeah, for me, it's a critical part. I mean, I want it all. I mean, I want a great career and I want a great family. And as I break it down, I always break it down into three segments. Number one is I think you have to plan your personal life with the same rigor and discipline you do your professional life, or your personal life will suffer. And so similar to in the corporate world, you'll have a strategy, values, you'll plan your calendar around it. I do the very same thing in my personal life. Family strategy, family values, very clear strategy relative to charitable giving. My wife and I were very focused on youth and education. Those are the two places where we want to make a difference. Second one, I always tell people to focus on efficiency. Will set you free. In a competitive world, it's not about doing less work. It's about doing the work you do more efficiently, more effectively. And I'm very focused in terms of how I do that, using time that I spend on airplanes as work instead of watching 3 movies. And then the last one is I'm a big believer in today's global world that you have to be a corporate athlete. When you fly globally, come off a plane, grab a shower and then head into a meeting, out to dinner that night, I just don't know how you do that without taking care of yourself physically. And so the combination of those three is what I've really tried to do to strike a balance. Successful career and more importantly for me even is a successful home life.
That's wonderful to hear, and I think a very good model for all of us to follow. And in your supportive education, you've come back to Mizzou many times and spoken to our students in a variety of ways. One of the talks you gave recently at Mizzou focused on U.S. competitiveness. Can you walk us through where you think we stand on that now?
Yeah, the thing I was trying to do is to get people to, a lot of times you get into the discussion about trade or tax, or education, and I always, encourage people to take a step back and think about the broader issue. And I think the broader issue is competitiveness. With everything that goes on in Washington, D.C., a lot of people want to debate, Republican versus Democrat, and from my viewpoint, that's not the debate. It's U.S. competitiveness relative to, Germany, Japan, Brazil, China, India, and others. Because if you just look at the statistics, it tells you that there's a direct correlation between competitiveness and standard of living. The more competitive a society, the higher standard of living. And the U.S. enjoyed that, growth or improvement on our competitiveness that led to each generation having a higher standard of living. The thing that I think we need to be conscious of today is I think in some respects we're losing that edge. Most people would agree that education is a foundation of competitiveness, but if you look at where we rank in global rankings today versus where we were 20 years ago, math, science, and others, we've come down the ranking. Most people would agree that infrastructure, the ability to move goods and services, is the key to competitiveness. But if you look at the quality of U.S. infrastructure today versus 20 years ago, I think you'd say that we've underinvested in infrastructure. An element of competitiveness is tax regimes or structures. 1986 was the last time that we did a rewrite of our corporate tax structure. We haven't changed the international rules around our tax structure in 50 years, while the rest of the world has adapted. So I just think there's elements that as a country, we need to accept the fact that we need to raise our game. And I think there's 1950, the U.S. represented 50% of global GDP.
It's amazing.
Today, we're less than 20. So we can no longer dictate the terms and conditions. We have to be, competitive. I think the opportunities are here. When I get frustrated about this, I always remember Churchill's quote. You can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after every other possibility has been exhausted. And I think we're exhausting a few possibilities, but the foundation for competitiveness exists. But I really do think it's a time as a country where we're going to have to raise our game.
Well, maybe one area where we have stepped up a little better is trade and free trade. And in some ways, this has been a really strong area of public-private partnership. I know Caterpillar actively advocated for the passage of our free trade agreements in a variety of countries, South Korea, Panama, Colombia. Where do you see that going? Where the opportunities are, where we should be looking as a nation, and also for private enterprise?
Trade is a critical area. It's one that, as a company, Caterpillar, we've been advocates of free trade back to our founding in 1925, and the role it plays in terms of growth and standard of living and the other things. Trade's critically important. I'd like to tell you that the next big step in trade is going to be driven out of the WTO, and the Doha round. But I think we got to be realistic. And if you really look at the evolution of trade, there was a long period where we really had good, significant movement, GATT and then WTO. But with really what's happened in not being able to advance the Doha round, you've seen a move more to bilateral trade agreements between individual countries. Those bring value, but it drives a complexity in terms of the global movement of trades and services that has a downside to it as well. I think what we're seeing develop now is regional trade agreements, and I think the most significant one that's in debate, in fact, I was just in Indonesia last week, and part of the discussions is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. A regional bloc around the Pacific, rim, if you would, coming together and really advancing it. So if you got the U.S., you got Canada, Mexico, Peru, Japan has just entered, and it's a significant enough part of the global economy. It would be the most significant trade agreement that the U.S. has signed on to since NAFTA. And I think we're starting to see those regional economies accept the fact, in the vacuum being left by the WTO, I think regional agreements are going to be the next big thing, and I think TPP by far has gained the most momentum.
Today there's a lot of discussion and concern related to sustainability. How does Caterpillar view sustainability, and what challenges and opportunities do you think it brings to your organization?
I think the primary view on sustainability is, I think we probably went through a phase where in the early days of debate and discussion it was something you held to the side as something you needed to be concerned about. I think that the real transition for us, I think, came is when we made it core to our strategy. You know, the one thing I'm absolutely convinced of is sustainability can be good for the environment, it can be good for business. And we've made some huge gains in this area. You know, if you look at diesel engine technology today and what happens here in the U.S., you know, over the last 10 years, we've had about a 90% reduction in emissions. You know, in terms of providing, you know, much more of a quality product. In addition to that, at the same time, we've been reducing the emissions through, you know, vertical integration, the way we bring systems together from a bunch of good engineers that come out of the school as well. We've also been able to advance our equipment with better fuel efficiency. So lower emissions, higher fuel efficiency, which is a big contributor in terms of sustainability. Remanufacturing, you know, remanufacturing machines or parts. We're the world's largest industrial remanufacturer. It's good value to customers because they can buy a reman engine component, and it's good value to, you know, the environment because you're not discarding, you know, in terms of waste. So I think, you know, the sustainability of, you know, making it core to your strategy, and you can really find ways, you know, to be, you know, good for the environment but also good for the business. Going forward, I think one of the opportunities for companies are, if you've got 7 billion people in the world today, it's going to 9 billion by 2050 is the current estimates. I mean, there's 1.3 billion people today without electric power. You know, the estimates are there's almost 800 million people without access to clean water. I mean, that's 3 times the population of the U.S. So as a company, if you can bring sustainable development, you know, products, services, or solutions to contractors, to our customers around the world who can build out that infrastructure in a responsible way, not only do you protect the environment, but I think we've also got to keep, you know, our sights on, you know, bringing a better quality of life to this urbanizing population. And so those are things that I get excited about. You know, we can do it in a sustainable way and create a better place.
Let's talk about Asia, an area of the world where you're spending a lot of your time these days. Asia is expected to account for close to half of global construction by 2020. What is it about this region that continues to support such growth? Now that you're sort of on the front lines, can you demystify that trend for us? You know,
I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's driven by some very fundamental factors. I mean, if you just look globally, you know, you got 7 billion people in the world. And, you know, to me, it's not only the growth in population, but it's where that population is living. 2010 was the first time in history that more than half the world's population were urban dwellers instead of rural. And if you look at Asia, the urbanization, you know, still has a long way to go. And it's one of the key drivers of economic growth and development. And I think, you know, the run on that, you know, there's a long way to go. I mean, China, in essence, is creating a new Chicago every 6 weeks with their urbanizing population. And as that urbanization happens, if you think of the requirements, you know, in terms of infrastructure to make that happen, at CAT we always like to say the road to progress begins with the road, period. And the build out of infrastructure, sewer, water, housing, the other things that have to happen is just a tremendous driver of growth that I think is going to play out in Asia, you know, for a number of years to come.
So how about after 2020? How about after that settles and plateaus? What are you looking at? What's CAT looking at down the road? You
know, long term, you know, not only, I think Asia offers tremendous opportunities, but if you just look around the world, you know, 3 of the fastest 10 growing cities in the world today exist in Africa. You know, a continent, you know, that you know, I've got a lot of experience and time and lived on, and it's got tremendous balance or focus in terms of natural resources and things that really could, you know, provide impetus for growth. It's been hamstrung by corruption and lack of stability in terms of governments, but even there's some pockets that are starting to show some stability there. Latin America used to go through a financial crisis every 3 years. I was in Brazil during the whole Lehman Brothers and the global financial crisis, and in a discussion with a customer that night as we watched global markets melt down, and his comment was, I don't know what you're so worried about. We've been going through you know, financial crisis every 3 years for the last 50, but we're seeing some stability. Good growth opportunities in Peru, Chile, Brazil. You're seeing advancements in areas like Colombia.
Colombia's a tremendous story.
Tremendous story. So great opportunities there. The other one that sometimes comes as a surprise, when people say, where do you see tremendous growth opportunities long term? I always come back to the opportunities right here. You know, if you look at the U.S., you know, a little bit of a renaissance in terms of manufacturing. If we would have had this debate 10 years ago and would have said that the U.S. has the opportunity for energy independence, you would have said no way. North Dakota just passed Alaska in terms of oil production.
That's amazing.
Think about it.
Yeah.
And then you know, the other opportunity that, you know, definitely the housing situation's behind us. We're seeing improvement there. And at some point in time, we're going to figure out that our infrastructure is in a state of disrepair, and there's a huge investment opportunity that comes with that. And you know, if you look at infrastructure investment, what it does for job creation, you know, the multiplier effect that comes with it, there's a lot of good things that could happen right here close to home.
Well, that's something to look forward to. So Caterpillar is unique in how global it is and yet retains its very strong headquartered hold in the United States from the beginning. What do you think the advantages are that you gain from that combination, having this very strong local home and a global focus?
I think, you know, one of the gains is you know, the core of any company, I think, is its core set of values. And you know, I tell you, we get a call a week from somebody saying, well, you need to move out of Peoria and you know, move to, you know, Texas, or, you know, headquarter out of Atlanta or Chicago or whatever. And you know, the one thing we always reflect on is, you know, similar to my comments earlier, you know, I am a Mizzou Tiger. It's a foundation that it draws me back. I think a big part of our foundation as a company is that Midwest, you know, foundational culture. Most of us, you know, from very humble beginnings, very strong value set. And I think having that base, you know, like we do in a Midwest headquarters, you know, really serves us well. The other one that sometimes comes as a surprise to people, I was flying with one of our board members, and he says, do you ever feel disadvantaged being in the Midwest and not being able to attract top talent out of the East Coast schools? And my comment was, I'm not sure you understand our business. The Midwest culture plays exceptionally well globally. People that, like I said, are humble in how they go about it, willing to listen to people, willing to get their hands dirty, engage with employees at all levels. The Midwest Foundation really plays well for us globally, and I think that's one of the things that makes it a great combination for us.
I'm proud to hear that, if I may say that. So another challenge, if you will, that I think you all receive sometimes is that because of the way you operate globally, sometimes you're questioned on whether you export jobs. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, I think it's sometimes, you know, you hear comments like that, and as I engage, which is part of my job, is an accountability to do in Washington and others, the thing I always try to help people understand is the best way to be a great U.S. company is to be a great global company. You know, the benefits of global growth and a company like Caterpillar expanding around the world comes back to benefit, you know, the U.S. I mean, our headquarters are here. Our director of IT, director of HR, finance, you know, growing globally, you know, positively impacts, you know, U.S. And there's been studies about U.S. multinationals and the growth that it really drives locally. The other one is the fact that we can compete and win around the world just keeps us on our toes and makes us a better company. We've been in Brazil since the early 1950s. I'll be in Japan here, you know, next week, celebrating 50 years in Japan. And competing with Komatsu toe-to-toe in Japan for the last 50 years has made us a better company. Competing with emerging competitors in China today, long-term will make us a better company. You know, Mizzou, can you be great in the SEC if you don't win on the road?
No.
You know, you can't. And I think that's the same for great companies. If you want to be a great U.S. company, demonstrate that you can compete globally, and then I think you got something.
But I will say directly into the camera at the time of this filming, we did win on the road. So just with that as an aside for the benefit of our viewing audience, let's talk about that global footprint, some of the cultural challenges more at the human level for your organization. You all have very strong values. It's one of the things that we love hearing from you when you come back. It's one of the things that I rely on as you serve on the board of your alma mater and as I lead that institution, just part of the full service, a phrase that you and I have exchanged many times invest in your people culture. What are the leadership challenges of maintaining that kind of culture with such a tremendous global footprint?
It's difficult. The one thing that I think we've understood from the very beginning is, one, it's a relationship business. We just happen to sell machines, engines, and parts, and so we've always been focused on the people side of it. The other, I think, key part of our leadership philosophy, which, trust me, was ingrained in the company long before I came along. But I think it's for leaders to understand that you're stewards of the business for a period of time. I think each of us in our jobs understand we have two main accountabilities. So number one is to leave the place better than we found it. Competition's getting better every day, and so how do you drive your company to be better today than it was yesterday? The second accountability we really stay focused on is to leave it in more capable hands. When I went to CAT, it was a $10 billion company. Today it's a $55 to $60 billion company. When I came to CAT in 1979, huge parts of the world weren't open to us. And today, we can compete virtually anywhere in the world. So the leadership requirements, in the future are going to be greater than they are today. And so we stay very focused at how you bring people through the system to make sure that you can, turn it over to more capable hands. The other thing I think it's critical of being able to really compete globally, though, is to understand that that requirement is to build great local talent in the U.S., but also to build great local talent in China, Japan, Brazil, and others. If we're going to compete and win in China, we need to have local leaders that are engaged, tie into the company culture, and committed. And so as I travel the world, I spend a lot of time on that very issue. What does it mean to be a leader at Caterpillar? What does it mean to serve for a period of time with always the intent to pass on the company to the next generation? And I think as a leader, that's one of the things we take very seriously as our accountability. History would tell you it's not the biggest or strongest companies that survive. It's those that adapt. And having leaders in those local countries that understand those local markets is a key part to how we get that done.
Well, let's talk a little bit about nurturing talent, because that's where we have a shared mission. So you talked earlier about your Midwestern roots and also talked about how your Midwestern values help you consistently to this day as you travel around the world. Let's think back to this next generation of students that hopefully you'll be hiring as you do this leadership planning. How would you suggest this generation of Midwestern students leverage where they come from and the opportunities they have here to be competitive globally?
Well, first of all, I look at the current generation of the student body, and I openly tell them when I engage with them in discussion is that their job is much more difficult than mine. Like I said, when I came out of school here, I wasn't competing in many cases with kids coming out of China, Russia, Central Europe. Those parts of the world were completely shut off, and so the competition that kids coming out of school today face versus what I had to face back in 1979, I tell you, I think maybe I'm just glad I came through when I did. I think the requirements is to take the foundational issues that I think that really made a difference to me. But it's really to open up their minds to the fact that there is a globe. Sometimes when you're sitting in Columbia, Missouri, you may not wake up understanding what happened with global markets overnight, what's going on with currency movements. And I think students of today better be ready for that. I think the encouragement and what the school's doing on study abroad, of really driving students to understand other cultures and what's happening around the world. One of the terms that I use with employees internally as they engage globally, unpack your bags. You're not going to understand the dynamics of what goes on in China by going there as a tourist. Find opportunities to go and really get your hands dirty, unpack your bags, and understand, be it Latin America, Asia, other parts of the world, because that's the scheme that you're going to compete in. The other one is to understand that the people that are coming out of some of these emerging markets are driven by factors that probably influenced my grandparents, trying to aspire to that higher standard of living, trying to provide something better for their next generation than they had. So if I look at our employees around the world, they're motivated. We offer voluntary English language in China and get almost 100% participation. because they're driven by what you and I, in a lot of cases, take for granted, you know, a higher standard of living.
So let's talk about the other side of that coin. You've issued a challenge to the next generation, in a manner of speaking, on how they need to be thinking about the world in order to be competitive. We are challenged by that too. It's our job to get them ready for that. And you talked earlier about your passion for education, which of course we share, particularly its power to make the world a better place for our students and for the companies they serve, the communities they serve. What do you think we as educators need to do to maximize our ability to equip our students for what they'll need?
Yeah, you know, first of all, in terms of the power of education, I mean, you know, like I said, I just think back to how, you know, my world changed off the foundation of the, you know, the education I got from the University of Missouri, and you know, I'd advise students never underestimate it. You know, one of 7 kids off a small farm in Missouri, and you know, to have the opportunities to do the things I've done, see the things I've seen, all came based on the foundation of the education here. I think the evolution of education at this level, you know, if you look at it, for us to be successful in our business, we've got to go into our customer base, and we've really got to understand the work they do, the challenges they have, and then how do we address those challenges by bringing better products, better services, you know, to bear. And I think what you're trying to drive here is very much the same. Reaching into companies, understanding what are your challenges, what type of students do we need to provide, what kind of pipeline do we need to be able to offer, and to me that is the next evolution. Yeah, there was a period of time where you had the educational institutions and you had corporate, and I think what we're seeing more and more is the evolution of bringing those two together. So my encouragement would be, you know, one is to continue to be very open, as you've been, about what are the requirements, you know, curriculum development, you know, developing your students, what you do on leadership development, for the leadership development that happens with kids that are coming out of the program here. You know, they're so far ahead where I was when I came out of the University of Missouri, and I think it's a perfect example of what we need in terms of people coming into the business school. The other one is to do, you know, provide the opportunities, I think, more and more as we move forward, of even doing joint projects. You know, there was a period of time when we engaged with college students as interns or even on projects, and it was kind of makeshift work. But if you look at the creativity and the capability that exists in the student body today, you know, we can use college students to help us solve real problems. And so I think just continuing to derive that partnership between the corporate world and the educational institution, I think, is really what you know, can add value for us, and I think add value for the students as well.
With everything that's going on with the political scene, what's your advice to this next generation of students on how they should engage in the process?
Yeah, you know, it was actually at an event here, and a relatively small group, and we got into the discussion and debate relative to politics, and I told the students, yeah, it's really not Republican versus Democrat, it's all about U.S. competitiveness. And you know, the young lady, I give her a lot of credit. You know, she said, "Are you so worried about the elections because you're afraid your taxes are going up?" And you know, first of all, you're creating some courageous students around here to ask that kind of question in a broad audience. And my response to her was, you need to understand my lot in life is far greater than I ever expected when I was sitting where you were, I mean, the student was. And you know, Social Security is probably even going to last as long as I am. And you know, my point was, I got 3 kids. You know, someday, you know, hope to have grandkids. And I think if youth today doesn't get involved, doesn't express their opinion, doesn't get informed on the issues, isn't worried about competitiveness, you know, I told them my concern is you're going to wake up sometime between 30 and 35 years old paying bills for my generation you can't afford with a lower standard of living. And I think youth today needs to be informed voters. They need to understand the issues. Because I think that's the only way we're going to generate change.
A couple of years ago, you were our commencement speaker, and you had a very specific message for our students that day. Can you summarize that for us?
First of all, it was absolutely a highlight of my life. You know, when I was in high school, we had a good basketball team, a small town, and we almost got to Hearns in the state basketball championships. Came up one game short. And so I opened by saying I always wanted to play at Hearns. I just never knew it would be like this, because that's where the commencement speech was at. I titled it "No Regrets," because I don't think people want to go through life, look back, and I wish I would have done this or wish I would have done that. And I really built it around 3 clear points. Number 1 was to encourage students to take the time to thank the people that have gotten you to this point. If you look at a graduating senior from college here, I'd say there are very few exceptions that didn't have someone who made a huge impact along the way. And I really encouraged them to put it down in writing, not a text or a tweet. I mean, a good old-fashioned put it down in writing and express your appreciation. For me, my parents, I had a 2nd grade teacher, and people that had a huge impact, let them know. The second point I really pushed them on was, and the advice I gave to our own kids is, find something you have a passion for and figure out how to turn it into a job, or you'll work the rest of your life. If you think about the successful people typically they follow their passion versus strictly pursuing a paycheck. And I just encouraged them to figure out what that passion is and follow it. And then the last one was this one about strike the balance. I've seen it where people go through life purely pursuing the professional side of their life, sacrificing everyone and everything else along the way. And when you get to that end of that journey, you may achieve a lot professionally, but the point I tried to make clear is it will be a shallow victory. I take great pride in what's happened at CAT. There's a lot of mornings I wake up and can't believe I get to do what I do. But the pride I take in that pales in comparison to the pride I take in what Ann and I have created, in a marriage and 3 kids that we love dearly, and now a daughter-in-law that's a Mizzou grad. I mean, those are the things that are enduring, because as I said earlier, we're a steward of the business.
Right.
My time at CAT will come to an end. I'll pass the baton on to someone else, and I think managing that balance is what makes the next phase of life as exciting for me. I got a few years left here, but in terms of what I look for.
I hope so.
That was the advice I passed on.